this is Steve Crom, and welcome to a series of podcasts on the topic of agility. I'm speaking with Günter Kloucek about his experience as a leader in managing mid-sized companies and countries here in Europe and larger countries. He's also as the head of strategy at the European level. Thank you, Günter, for joining me on this podcast series, and we're eager to learn from your experience, especially in pharma, right, which is not known historically as the most flexible of industries for good reasons, because it's regulated. I'm a partner with OXYGY, and we're in the business of helping clients rethink, innovate, and implement new ways of working. My personal consulting work over the last 15 years has been mainly about leaders and leadership team effectiveness. Why agility? I think all of us have seen the increased importance of that, including during the COVID crisis. And as the world becomes less and less predictable, certainly agile ways of working are more relevant than ever. And as we've talked in our earlier series, it's not about replacing one way of leading with another. It's about understanding the context you're in and working appropriately. We have identified 6 different attributes of a successful leader when agility is called for. It's around emphasizing purpose, encouraging entrepreneurialism, empowering delegating, supporting individual and organization development. It's also about experimentation and really as a leader being a role model in your own behaviors to reinforce the other 5. Günter, last time we talked about the importance of leaders to co-develop and articulate a purpose. Today's topic is really about empowerment and development, and I'm interested to see why you put those two things together, and I think it has to do with the topic of kind of freedom and autonomy and how those two things act together, because one of the challenges I think we have as leaders is we have lots of responsibility, but the higher up you go, the less control you have. Yeah, talk to me about your thoughts on how to deal with the necessity in the world we're in today to give, as you put it, unusual degrees of freedom to people in the organization.
Steve, on the one side, it's about the willingness of the leader to really give greater autonomy to their teams. And this has a lot to do with leadership beliefs. However, I think there is no other choice if you as a leader don't want to become the rate limiting factor. And customers today are no longer willing to wait until their question is played up and down the hierarchy ladder. And the world is moving on so quickly. So even when leaders are willing to empower others and to delegate decision-making rights, then the other question which occurs is how ready is the organization to embrace this unusual degree of freedom and to accept responsibility and accountability. From my experience, empowerment is not an all or nothing proposition. Proficiency levels and the degrees of autonomy really go hand in hand and develop over time. So for me, the responsibility as a leader is to judge the capability levels of individuals and teams, to challenge them, but also to coach and support them that they can have initial success, early success, which is then motivating them to do more and is encouraging them to take on more responsibility.
So a leader shouldn't be the rate limiting factor, which means other people, you've got to give them the opportunity to take on more. Their ability to take on more is a function of their capability to do that. So you're saying that you need to be able to support that initial learning process. And it sounds to me a little bit like you need to, as a leader, help balance what you're asking people to do, right? Along with the how. So it's alignment around a specific goal and an objective, giving them a certain degree of freedom on the how. I'm reminded of an example I had with an engineering company in Germany. I was coaching the leaders because their temptation was really to dive into the details. They were technical experts. They know more about turbine blades than anybody in the business. But what that did was it robbed the people in the organization of the opportunity for them to learn. So somehow, talk to me, Günter, about how do you find that sweet spot between providing a clear objective but not dictating how things should be done?
Yeah, this brings an example up to my mind. For changing our business model, we have put a pretty solid and comprehensive transformation approach in place. Dedicated cross-functional teams were working on really purpose-driven solution design to implement these solutions in an agile way. However, the devil is in the detail, as you know, and we needed to learn how to build and to lead those teams. For example, we as a senior leadership team did initially not find the right balance between guiding and empowering the dedicated teams working on defined priority areas. And for some work streams, the mandate in terms of what to achieve was not clear enough or not well enough aligned with the overall purpose, and this left a lot of room for ambiguity. For other work streams, the guidance was too detailed in terms of how to achieve it, leaving too little freedom to the teams. And in addition, the progress review process we had put in place with the entire senior leadership team was very time consuming, and many corrective actions were made pretty late in the process, which was frustrating the work streams and the leadership team likewise. So what we did was we changed the approach. We were focusing now on very concrete business issues and giving more autonomy to the teams to solve them in iterative sprints. For example, we changed the rather generic task to develop innovative pay-for-performance contracting schemes into conclude innovative contracts with 3 relevant payers and then propose scale-up based on the learnings from this exercise. And in addition, a dedicated leadership team member was not just sponsoring the work streams in the traditional sponsor way, but also had to coach and support the team to ensure that they had everything they need in terms of resources. And only a few carefully defined high-stake projects needed endorsement from the leadership team. The changes really altogether accelerated the progress and enhanced the quality of the solutions likewise. The iterative approach also helped us to reduce the complexity of the projects and increased our ability to adapt to external influencing factors.
So even if you have an ambitious goal, objective, vision, break it into bite-sized chunks, right? And the clearer the objective is, the more autonomy you can give the teams, but keep the leadership team engaged, right? So you can kind of nudge them in the right direction and take out the roadblocks as you go. And I find too, how many projects does an organization have going on? I remember one experience I had, the CEO was very frustrated with things taking too long. And I said, well, how many projects do you have? And he said, well, maybe 50. There were 150 projects going on. So the first thing we had to do was step back and say, let's do an inventory of what people are actually working on. Yeah. And then let's select which ones and not overburden the organization. And let's do a formal charter. Even if it's a small, rapid prototype project that needs to get done quickly, let's give it a clear end, a clear beginning. And I think that's a part of agility too. Say more about the delegating decision-making, because this is something I think that lots of leaders that makes us nervous, right? Yeah,
if you delegate decision-making as far down in the organization as possible and feasible, I think one key aspect is to ensure that the governance process is really supporting this. What I mean is you need to take the time to define which few high-stake decisions are best made by senior leaders or leadership committees, and delegate everything else to direct reports and people close to the day-to-day activities. In this case, leaders only step in for resolving situations where, for instance, teams are going off direction or where employees cannot agree on a joint decision. And that way you can ensure timely progress and avoid lengthy standoffs, which again would negatively impact the organizational climate. However, there is another important aspect to consider, and that's the impact of company processes on agility and decision-making at the front line. When we did our transformation initiatives, we realized on the go that we had a few processes in place which were actually disempowering teams. To give you an example, when the new anti-corruption law was set in force in 2016, we've put in place a very stringent compliance process. And apart from the inevitable moaning when you need to let go successful past activities, especially our marketing and sales teams felt disempowered. by pre-approval for all customer activities through compliance. This created the issue that innovative yet compliant solutions to replace the old ones were not developed. The collaboration spirit between business and compliance was at an all-time low. So we reworked the process in a joint cross-functional effort to give more decision-making autonomy to customer-facing functions, while at the same time keeping key compliance rules to protect the company reputation in place. We defined a kind of traffic light system for activities, giving guidance on autonomy on the one hand and the need for compliance involvement on the other hand. And in addition, what we learned, it was also really key to the redefined compliance function, to emphasize more the solution support element than rather the pure police function.
I mean, you've talked also, about the need for cross-functional collaboration. That example is a good one. It's another example. We've talked earlier about the need for vertical and horizontal agility, right? You mentioned as a leader, you need to be an architect and be able to go up, but then you also need through your behaviors on a day-to-day basis to really on the ground show what it is you're expecting of others. This is another example of the need for, I think, horizontal agility, because my experience is that the really strategic initiatives that help companies innovate are taking place in the white space on the organization chart, if you follow me, right? It's really this cross-functional initiatives. Can you elaborate more on that?
Traditional organizations, especially in highly regulated industries like life science, are strongly structured in function, which is actually not really facilitating collaboration naturally. And to foster mindset of collaboration and partnership, I think we as leaders need to involve and invite everybody to contribute, to listen, to trust people, and also need to facilitate joint problem solving and decision making in the day-to-day work. But it also means we need to encourage all team members to take accountability for individual and team outcomes. And therefore, universal set of metrics, which are known and understood by everybody in the organization, and objectives aligned across teams and functions are needed. If everybody defines its own goals and KPIs, although the task is only manageable cross-functionally, it's not going to work. And at the beginning, this is quite a time investment, but taking the time to carefully align cross-functional objectives really pays off.
Let's shift gears a minute and talk a little bit more about development. And you've made the point that proficiency and autonomy go hand in hand, that the more specific, the clearer the objective you're asking of an individual or team, also the more latitude and degrees of freedom you can give them. Say more about development.
Coaching and development need to take place on both the organizational and the individual level. On the organizational level, I think leaders need to build the required capabilities, such as digital capabilities, customer engagement capabilities, whatever it takes, across the entire organizations, giving everyone the opportunity to build the new mindsets and skills they will need in the new environment. What's needed in any case is building the capability of lateral leading without any formal authority for leaders of these cross-functional, agile, empowered teams, where members are frequently not direct reports to the leaders. On the individual level, people may need coaching on their day-to-day decision-making, given the, as we said, unusual degree of freedom and accountability. This is easier said than done, because coaching to enable and encourage decision-making means resisting your own problem-solving reflex, because otherwise you are just enabling dependence. And I know it from my own experience, and I remember very well your advice in one of our coaching sessions a couple of years ago, Steve, where you said, don't jump in because you can. And actually, finally, I have embraced this.
Right. Because just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it, right?
Yeah.
And it's very interesting, the point about influencing and managing without formal authority. We get a lot of requests for clients because the matrix has gotten really complicated in most global organizations today. And we've been working on influencing styles. Now I know why it's so important, because if you're in a development function, probably all your colleagues are scientists, and they love the data, they want the facts, and right. But then you start to work cross-functionally, and you're working with the marketing folks and the law department, and you're working with the salespeople. You need to broaden your repertoire. Back to our earlier conversation, agility is also about having a repertoire of how you influence and get things done. There are 5, right? You can tell somebody, well, that works some of the time, but less and less. You can appeal to them to achieve a common goal. Back to our conversation of purpose. It's very powerful. You can involve them. As a good leader, you should, as you brought up, because then they own it. You can persuade them, sure. Maybe we need more evidence and more facts. And you talked about customer solutions with an N of 1. Well, maybe we ought to collect more data. Maybe we ought to involve the customers. And you can also negotiate, right? And that as a leader of a large organization, because you work in a corporate context. But I think those 5, we need to get more agile as individuals and across the organization, because things are being done, as you point out, more and more in a horizontal way. Thank you, Günter. That's been an insightful conversation. I appreciate it. So please stay tuned for the next in our series, which is we're going to dive into the topic of experimentation, because it's so critical to agility, to learning, and to innovation. Please join us in this dialogue and in this conversation. We invite you to reach out to us via email, like and share on LinkedIn, and visit our OXYGY website. Thank you for joining us.